think are of very significant importance to the people of our country. Madam President, on Sunday, just 2 days ago, I held a town meeting in Montpelier, Vermont, on the issue of saving the Postal Service. And I was frankly stunned by the number of people who came. As you know, Vermont is not the largest state in the country, and yet we had some 350 people crowding into the cafeteria at Montpelier High School to say very clearly that they do not want to see the Postal Service dismembered. They do not want to see policies develop which will create a death spiral for the post offices of America. And we heard a lot of testimony from many people. And bottom line is that everybody in that room thought that it was terribly wrong that in the midst of a recession, the post office is talking about cutting 120,000 good-paying jobs in our country. Didn't make sense to anybody in that room. And I find it ironic that at a moment when appropriately enough, and I strongly support the effort, we're talking about creating jobs for veterans who are coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan with high unemployment rates. Many of the people who work in the post office are, in fact, veterans. So on one hand, we're trying to create jobs for veterans. On the other hand, if the Postal Service does what it wants, we may end up losing 120,000 jobs, including many for veterans. Madam President, I wanted to just touch on some of the important issues, I think, that we have to deal with regard to the Postal Service. And I want to just go over a letter that Senators Leahy, Gillibrand, and Wyden and myself sent to the chairpeople and ranking members of the Committee on Homeland Security and the subcommittee as well, and that is Senators Lieberman, Collins, Carper, and Scott Brown. And these are the points that we made in our letter, and these are points that are going to be incorporated in legislation that I will be introducing this week, legislation that I think is common sense legislation that will help us create a business model so that the Postal Service can be successful, legislation that will save 120,000 jobs. And this is what we wrote in the letter to the Homeland Security Committee. First and foremost, and a lot of people don't know this, people say correctly, Postal Service is having problems because we're in a digital age. First-class mail is going down because people are emailing. That's true. Second of all, we're in the midst of a recession. Many businesses are facing problems. But the most important financial problem facing the Post Office today are not those issues. They are the issues of accounting approaches which have done great disservice to the Postal Service. The United States Postal Service uniquely has been forced to pre-fund 75 years' worth of future retiree health benefits in just 10 years. There is no other agency of government which comes close to that onerous requirement, nor do we believe there are any companies in the private sector that have been asked to do that. So you're asking the Postal Service to come up with a huge amount of money, put it into a fund in a way that no other agency of government, and we think no other private company, has been forced to do. This mandate costs the Postal Service between $5.4 and $5.8 billion per year, and it accounts for 100% of the Postal Service's $20 billion debt. Without that onerous requirement, the USPS would still have significant borrowing authority with the United States Treasury to ride out the tough economic times we are seeing in the recession. Furthermore, it's not only future retiree health benefits that they're being asked to come up and fund, but the USPS needs to recoup the overpayments that it has made to the CSRS and to the FERS, the Federal Retirement Systems. According to studies by the Hay Group and the Siegel Company, USPS has overpaid the CSRS by between $50 and $75 billion. So if you look at those two issues, if we can deal with those issues and treat the Postal Service fairly, we will have gone a very long way toward addressing the immediate financial crisis that the Postal Service is facing. Second of all, what we want to be very careful about as we develop business models for the future is not start cutting and creating a Postal Service which will no longer have customer support and lay the groundwork for literally a death spiral and the destruction and demise of the Postal Service in years to come. I come from a rural state, and post offices are extremely important to the people of small towns above and beyond getting mail. They become, in a sense, in some ways, the identifying feature of a small town. It's where people come together and they talk. It is very important, in my mind, not to pell-mell start cutting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of small post offices in rural America. And the legislation that we will be offering this week addresses that problem in, I think, a sensible and reasonable way. Second of all, the Postal Service can never be competitive if, when you drop a letter into a postal box, it takes 5 days for that letter to get to its destination. And one of the ideas that the Postal Service is talking about is making very significant cuts in what they call processing centers. That's where the mail is gathered and forwarded. And if you cut those centers, and in my state, we have two that are on the line, one in Essex Junction and one in Wright River Junction. And if you cut those and you cut other processing centers all over the country, what will happen is that when you drop that letter into a mailbox, it could take up to 5 days for that letter to reach its destination. And when you have that poor service, people simply are going to stop using the post office, and that continues the death spiral. People are not going to want to use the service. Thirdly, and in the same vein, the Postal Service is now talking about cutting Saturday delivery. And again, that means that there are a whole lot of folks who get prescription drugs on Saturday. There are a whole lot of people who get a magazine or newspapers on Saturday. You cut that back, and people are going to say, no, I don't want to deal with the post office anymore. It's not worth it. So it seems to me that the choice we have is to do what the Postal Service is now talking about, and that is cut and eliminate rural post offices, end Saturday mail delivery, cut out and eliminate significant numbers of processing centers, which will slow down the delivery of mail. That is one approach. And lay off, by the way, some 120,000 American workers, including many veterans. I think that is a very bad idea. The other approach is to come up with a business model which recognizes that we are in the 21st century, that the post office has got to evolve and change, and give the post office the freedom to compete in a way that addresses the consumer needs of its customers. Let me give you an example. The presiding office comes from a rural state, as I do. A lot of people in our states want to get fishing licenses. They want to get hunting licenses. If that person walked into a post office in rural New Hampshire, rural Vermont, they say, hey, can I fill out an application and get a fishing license or a hunting license? Post office says, no, we don't do that. We don't do that. We're not allowed to do that. We're prescribed from doing that. If an individual literally wants to walk into a post office, and postmasters tell me this happens every day, and somebody says, look, I have a letter here and I want it notarized. Could you please notarize it? They say, sorry. They may be a notary public. They're not allowed by law to notarize it. Now, the issue of the digital revolution is obviously impacting post offices not only in the United States but around the world. And other countries are looking at these challenges in a way that we are not. give you just one more example. For a lot of reasons, legal and otherwise, there are people who would like to see a document delivered to somebody in writing and not simply in email. There are post offices now in other countries where you can send an email, say from Vermont to California, it gets printed up, and on the same day that document gets delivered to a business or a home. Post office in America is not allowed to do that. So by law, our post office is restricted from entering the 21st century. If somebody walks into a post office now, they say, well, I want to print up 10 copies of this document. I need 10 copies. Where's your copying machine? Postmaster says, we don't have a copying machine. We're not allowed to have a copying machine. So there are a lot of ideas that are out there that people are talking about as to how the Postal Service can address the needs of customers in the 21st century. Last but not least on this issue, one of the people at the town meeting on Sunday got up and said, I just want to say this, that in our town, we know our letter carrier very well. And our letter carrier noticed that mail remained in the mailbox of an elderly person. And the mailman got on the phone, called up the police department because he suspected that something was wrong. Turned out something was wrong, and that person's life was saved. I expect that happens all over this country. We've got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of letter carriers who know people, who interact with people. They do play, and can more so play, an important role in providing services. So, bottom line, Madam President, is I think it is a bad idea in the midst of a recession to slash 120,000 jobs, including jobs of many of our veterans. Second of all, I do believe that if we use our brains and our entrepreneurial spirit, we can create a post office which is very relevant and can be profitable in the 21st century. We will be introducing legislation addressing all of these issues, and I hope very much that my colleagues will be co-sponsoring that legislation. Madam President, there is another issue that I wanted to talk about a little bit, and that is the work of the Super Committee. This country has a record-breaking deficit. It has a $14+ trillion national debt, and I think all of the American people, or virtually all, want to see the Super Committee come up with a proposal which makes sense and which helps us address our deficit crisis. And my suggestions to the Super Committee is they, in fact, can do that by simply doing what the American people want them to do. Now, I have heard some ideas out there where members of the Super Committee are talking about cutting Social Security, which has not contributed one nickel to our deficit and has a $2.5 trillion surplus. I've heard other ideas out there. We got to cut Medicare and we got to cut Medicaid. Well, got 50 million people without any health insurance. I don't think it's a brilliant idea to throw more and more people off of health insurance. So I think those are bad ideas, and every single poll that I have seen tells me that the American people agree that those are dumb ideas. Meanwhile, I have seen and talked to a whole lot of people who are asking me this question. They say, how is it that when the wealthiest people in this country are becoming much wealthier, when the effective tax rates of the top 2% are the lowest in decades, why isn't it that we're asking those people who are doing phenomenally well to start paying their fair share of taxes? And let me tell you something, this is not just a progressive idea, it is not just a democratic idea. What the polls suggest is all across the political spectrum, the American people are saying, yes, it is right and appropriate that the wealthiest people in this country start paying their fair share of taxes. And Madam President, I would just mention to you that an ABC News Washington Post October 5th, 2011 poll, 75% of independents support raising taxes on millionaires. In that same poll, 57% of Republicans support raising taxes on millionaires. In that same poll, 55% of Tea Party supporters, supposedly the extreme right wing who want to abolish Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, turns out not to be the case at all. 55% of Tea Party supporters agree with raising taxes on millionaires. According to a June 2011 Washington Post poll, 72% of Americans support raising taxes on incomes over $250,000. So I think we know what the American people want. They do not want, in poll after poll, to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, because they know how vitally important those programs are to the well-being of tens of millions of Americans. For example, according to a February 2011 NBC News Wall Street poll, 77% of Americans are opposed to cutting Social Security to reduce the deficit. So where are we as a country? We're pretty united. We're in agreement. But the American people are saying the rich are getting richer, their effective real tax rates have gone down, they've got to pay more in taxes to help us do deficit reduction and create jobs. The American people also understand that there are huge corporate loopholes out there. Oil companies making money hand over fist, getting huge tax breaks. Wall Street getting huge tax breaks. We lose $100 billion a year because large companies and the wealthy put their money into tax havens in the Cayman Islands, Bermuda, and Panama. People of this country know that that's wrong. So I would hope very much, Madam President, that the Super Committee will do nothing more than listen to the American people. That's all. And if you do that, you're going to do the right thing. Don't cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Ask the wealthiest people in this country to start paying their fair share of taxes. Do away with these outrageous loopholes that large, profitable corporations enjoy. If you do that, we can in fact come up with an agreement that will help us reduce the deficit and will win the support of Democrats, Republicans, Independents. And with that, Madam President, I would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr.